Well, hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. For those who this is your first time, I welcome you to Planner's Knowledge. Planner's Knowledge is a place where I interview authors. We learn about their books, their genre, and their author's journey. For those who are used to coming, welcome back. It is so good to see you and have you. As you all know, this has been a power packed week of interviews. Nicole, I have done 6 interviews. I was supposed to do 7. One person wasn't feeling well, so we had to reschedule. So,
Yikes.
but six interviews, 5 days. So we're getting them in. My purpose, of course, as I mentioned to you, is to introduce people to you, the author, your books, your genre, your author's journey. Encourage people to start reading again and buying books again, be it ebooks, hard copy, printed copy, so that they can give these books as gifts, one to self, but also to others. Um, I'm super excited to have you. As I mentioned, we got a chance to initially meet at Collingswood Book Festival this year. And your wonderful, what should we, mascot, that's what we'll call.
She's right outside.
Okay. Now, if she needs to make an appearance, it's okay. We love her. So Myrtle, right? So we'll have
Myrtle.
yes, we will
Myrtle, the
always,
rescue dog.
yes, we love Myrtle. So, and then I didn't get a chance to invite you then because Collingswood was what Collingswood was. And I didn't get a chance to go around and introduce myself to all the different authors and invite them on the show. But of course, as life would have it, we showed up and we were at Plymouth meeting together. So it was like, it is destined. I get a chance to talk to her. And so I am so happy that you were able to join us today. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. That is so kind.
You're
And,
welcome.
Philly area book stuff,
Yes,
tiny little community.
yes, yes, definitely. So now I have to tell you, my audience is slightly laughing at me because they know that I am not into horror. And here you are a horror, I'm gonna call you a horror specialist. And I say that
Sure.
because you actually got your master's in horror and storytelling. I didn't even know it was a thing until I read your bio.
Yeah. Now, in the US, you don't really have a lot of universities offering that kind of a degree. You can usually
Hmm.
get them in, for some reason, England has a lot of them. They
Ah,
have
I'm
like
not
Gothic
surprised to hear that as
programs.
you're saying that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, University of Pennsylvania, which is where I got my master's, has a master's program where your master's degree is your basic degree is in what your thesis is.
Mm,
And so that's how I ended up with a master's in horror and storytelling. My
gotcha.
thesis was all about, so I had COVID in the very
Uh-huh.
early part of the pandemic, and I
Okay.
ended up being hospitalized. It was before the vaccines came out.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was unpleasant, but this too passed.
Yes, yes.
And there is research from the Recreational Fear Lab in Denmark that
Hmm.
demonstrated people who watch or read or consume in some way horror, whether that's books, movies, video games, whatever, proved more resilient and able to cope with sort of the terror of the pandemic much better than people who don't. And so,
Really?
yes, I swear to you, Recreational Fear Lab does some amazing research on fear and horror. And the guy who runs it did this thing for his own degree. He created what is it, the Morbid Curiosity Index.
Hmm.
And you take sort of a little quiz, and it gives you the degree to which you have morbid curiosity in, I think it's like 4 different areas.
I am so writing this down. The Morbid Curiosity Index. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really very interesting. And so for me, that ended up showing that while I have a lot of morbid curiosity, as you might expect
Yes,
for a horror writer,
yes.
but I am not interested in real world violence.
Aha.
Like, I don't want to watch someone get killed. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
watch that if
Mm-hmm.
it's realistic.
Yes. Yes.
But every other part of horror, I'm all in on.
That is fascinating. I
Yeah.
never even, I am so horror adverse that I never even thought about the varieties within it. And it's interesting because I used to have a client a long time ago, and they were a young person, and they loved horror. And we would talk about it in their sessions. And one of the things that they would say, very similar to that, is that as long as it was more kind of paranormal, or in the sense where they knew it wasn't necessarily likely to be
Yep.
real, they were okay with it. Like they could find a laughter or a humor part of it, and they know that their body would physiologically respond to the surprise and the suspense and the thrill of it without the fear of
Hmm.
it. But if it was more of a possibility that this could happen, then they were not interested.
That's fair. I
Hmm.
think a fair amount of people who like horror do feel that way.
Yeah.
Like the whole idea behind why people are more resilient who consume horror
Yes.
is because when you are, watching horror, reading horror, whatever it is, you are exercising your fight or flight muscles, right?
Yep.
And so then when you're facing actual reality of that's horrifying, you are well practiced and you stay calm.
Mm, really?
Yes. So in theory, I should be a great person to have around in a sticky spot.
You sure should. Let me get your number. I'm gonna put you on speaker.
Next couple of years, I'm going to be your calm friend.
Now, when they ask me, Dr. Walls, who do you go to? I go to Nicole. Like,
That's right.
oh my, this is so fascinating, and it makes so much sense. And it's so funny because for me, the reason why I tend to not like horror is because I do deal with so much real life horror
Of
that the
course.
last thing that I want to do is add it to my pastime.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, granted, I do think the horror genre as a whole is much broader than most people do.
Do tell, teach
Um,
us.
so, one of the things that I like to talk about in my discussion panels when I have them is
Hmm.
I like to ask people, what is a film that you consider horror that other people don't? Because I always
Hmm.
get some really weird, not weird, but interesting answers. My own
Hmm.
answer is the film Titanic.
Huh. Okay. Let me hear this.
Most people don't consider it horror. I
Yes.
understand that. However,
Hmm.
it is a classic horror-mance film, the intersection
Okay.
of horror and romance.
Yes.
And everybody dies screaming or frozen at the end of that film. That's
That's
horror.
true. It sure is. It sure is. Oh my goodness. I would have never, and horror mance, I never even thought about that terminology. Yes, that's
That's
exactly what it
relatively
is.
new.
Huh. Now you got me thinking, what's my horror? I'm gonna have to think on that. I don't have one
Oh,
off
yeah.
the top of my head, but that's real true. Go ahead.
So someone else in one of my panels, I asked the question, and my favorite of the funny answers,
Hmm.
those shows where they redo your home,
Yeah.
like the reality shows.
Yes. Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, by the end of those, you know that there are people screaming.
Let me tell you, it's the truth. And you talk about fight or flight, you do. You wanna, and then there's sometimes where you walk in and you see it, and the people want you to be excited and happy, and you're frozen, right? So you get the fight, flight, or freeze, and then you got the fawn because you're trying not to hurt people's feelings, right?
Yep.
How
But yeah,
interesting. And it is so stressful. It can be very, very stressful, that whole process.
for sure.
Wow. Wow. I can't wait to hear what people are thinking as far as, they're going to be looking at movies in a very different way now. Now-
That's one of the problems with knowing me, I think, is once I start talking about horror, I plant it in people's minds that not everything they think is not horror is horror.
Mm.
And then you're kind of doomed.
Mm.
You're doomed to enjoy horror.
All right. Well, let's back up and get into your journey. Let's introduce people, tell them a little bit about yourself, and then let's move into how did this become your genre of choice?
Sure. So I live in outside of Philadelphia in Delaware County. but I grew up in a very small rural Northeast Pennsylvania town.
Mm.
And that's sort of the origin point of my novel that came out this year, which is A Misfortune of Lake Monsters. It's a young adult horror novel. It is my second novel that was published, but my first in horror. My first novel was published about a decade ago. It's an adult psychological thriller. I would say it's horror adjacent.
Okay.
Now, by day, I work at a university. I'm an assistant editor of a magazine, and I also write speeches.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I write anyway, just in a different way. My background, though, is as a nonprofit fundraiser and grant writer.
Okay, so you were just gonna write no matter what.
Yeah,
It was
I was doomed from the start.
you were. And when did you know that writing was your thing? That you can trace back to early memories.
So my mother, at not all that long ago, like maybe 15 years ago, was digging through a box of stuff that she had in the attic from my childhood. And she found a bunch of drawings that I had done when I was, I guess, like 4, maybe. Like it was before I could really write.
Yeah.
But these drawings were basically little books. I was telling stories in picture form, and I'm a terrible artist, like very bad. I can do stick figures still, even as an adult. And these little stick figure drawings that I did when I was a little kid showed these little stories where I and my imaginary friend, whose name was Mona, she was a little redheaded girl with ringlets and knives for fingers. So even as a little kid, horror was my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly I was writing from a very early age, throughout my entire childhood. Even when I did learn to write, I was writing stories. And one of my first jobs I ever had as like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old was weirdly writing obituaries for my local
Are you kidding
newspaper.
me?
So, things go back pretty far.
This is what's always so interesting when I talk with people. When you start to recognize that red thread that goes through your life, and it's like, sometimes people will say, like, I don't know where this came from. And it's like, well, what's your earliest memory of? And it's like, son of a gun, it's been there all along. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
wow.
It really, even if I hadn't been attracted to horror as a little kid, like on my own, I think I would have been doomed anyway, because my grandmother, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandmother. She was a big Alfred Hitchcock fan. And she also used to read me the original Grimm's fairy tales. Like the really horrific,
the real ones. Yeah,
why? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But we had like this ritual on our Saturday nights when I'd stay over at her house.
Yeah.
First, we would watch some Alfred Hitchcock. Then later, Saturday night, we would watch Love Boat and Fantasy Island.
I remember.
Yeah.
Yes.
And most people don't quite remember that Fantasy Island was actually a little bit horror-y.
It did have a suspense and an underlying, you weren't sure. There was an uncomfortable sensation that was inside. Yeah.
And Mr. Rourke, or whatever his name was.
That was it.
At some point, like later in the show, he had a couple of episodes where he was actually at war with the devil. And most people kind of forget that. But yeah, I just loved those shows.
So interesting. All right. So we can trace back to earlier memories and obviously some conditioning
Fair.
that took place along the way. When did you finally say, I'm going to create a book?
So I had always sort of been tinkering with the idea of writing a novel length work from probably, I remember thinking about it when I was in 5th grade. But, when you're of that age, you start stuff and then you don't finish it and you put it aside. And, at some point, probably around the time I graduated from high school. I'm like, well, I'd love to be a creative writer, but I need to be rational
Mm-hmm.
and I need to pick something to do that I can, make a living at. And I didn't
Yeah.
think that creative writing was a thing that I could necessarily do. I grew up kind of poor.
Okay.
And when I went to college, my whole thing was, I don't want to be poor anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of how I ended up as a nonprofit grant writer and fundraiser, because that was a thing. Like I could write doing that, but yet still make a living doing that and do good for other people.
Yes. Yes. Got it.
Yeah. And so I don't think that I genuinely sat down and wrote like a full novel until I was probably in my mid 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of did it one day.
Yeah.
And, learned as I was sort of going along what I needed to do to make that happen.
Yeah. Now, would you say what you can recall? Let me back up and say this. Please tell the people how many you've written a tremendous amount of like short stories and things like that. So please give people some numbers that you have behind you.
So right now I have like 50-ish short stories published. Not all of them are short stories. Some of it is creative nonfiction. I have a couple of essays published. Most are short stories though. They're in anthologies, they're in magazines. And that was, even as I was writing my first novel, I was like, well, let me do some short story work to sort of think about some ideas that were in my head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just get some things out on paper.
Yeah.
And my first short story was published, I think I might have been 38.
Okay.
Because it was just before my first novel came out. I'm 52 now.
Okay.
So that kind of gives you a little bit of a time frame.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love to do short stories and creative nonfiction. Almost as, and this is kind of a weird thing to say, but as a palate cleanser between projects.
Interesting.
Sometimes when you finish a novel, I don't know if you had this experience when you finished your Froggy book.
Writing.
But like you're thinking about what's next, but you're not really ready to commit to starting it. But yet you have all these other ideas in your head, and you just need something to kind of cleanse everything out in there.
I like that idea. And can you do me a favor, Nicole? Could you just give people some education on the terminology? So like when you talk about like short stories, when you talk about nonfiction, when you talk about just quick little definitions.
Sure. So a short story is usually something around like 1,500 words or longer, but that's up to about 30, well, not even, like 20,000 words usually is the ceiling for a short story. And after that, it goes up to like novella.
Okay.
Novellas are usually, depending on what genre you're writing in, like 20,000 up to maybe like 50, 60,000. And then novels up from there. Creative nonfiction is sort of like memoir, but you can take a couple of liberties with it. You can make it more interesting than what it really was, while still sticking to the basic facts. And of course, memoir is just, a life story.
Yeah.
And essays can be anything. I've written essays on everything from my own sort of horror journey to, I wrote an essay that's going to be published, I think, next year in a volume of Deep Space Nine Star Trek.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. It's a pop culture essay about a specific episode and what I thought of it. And I don't really watch Deep Space Nine. I'm not a Trekkie.
Okay.
But the publisher was looking for people to write essays on these various episodes, and wanted specifically for this one someone who hadn't really watched. I love working for this particular publisher because they always have these volumes about interesting shows, like television shows. Yes.
Yes, yes.
So I have pop culture essays for them on episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, the
Uh-huh.
companion show there, and I'm begging them to do a volume on the show Supernatural. I would
Oh. Let
love.
me I told you, like, I am a wimp, call me a punk when it comes to horror stuff. I was watching Supernatural until the screening started, it started getting very dark. Like
Yeah.
the visual representation was, and I was like, I can't take it. Like I need
Oh yeah.
Disney, I need pops of color and so forth. And I know Disney can be dark too. Don't get me
Oh
wrong.
yeah.
As you're talking. And for those who are just joining us, welcome. You are going to have to go back to the beginning. Make sure you catch this replay because Nicole and I just jumped right into the deep end and we started going. And she talked about morbid curiosity index. She talked about what was it? Horrormance. You said that's a
Horror
new
Mance, yeah.
horrormance. So those are romances that are really horror. Talked about the Titanic being a horror film. Like y'all gonna have to catch the first 15 minutes. I know we only 20 minutes in, but we started running from the gate. So all right. Oh my goodness. I love that. I wish my cousin, she's at work, I think, right now, but she did a pop culture um, article for BuzzFeed one
Oh,
time,
fun.
similarly. Yeah. Looking at a television show and comparing it. I can't remember what it is. If she jumps on, hopefully she'll type it in the chat. Um, but just fascinating. So thank you for breaking that down because a lot of times we'll hear things like essays, we'll hear novella, we'll hear a novel, and we don't necessarily know what that means and whether or not we feel as though we can write one. So you did a novel. Were you surprised that here you said that's like above 40,000 words, right? Were you surprised when all of a sudden you had this novel in front of you, or because you've been writing so much in so many different ways, did it not surprise you?
I was shocked that I finished it,
Mm-hmm.
especially because what I did with that first novel that I finished, I just sort of was like winging it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't do that now. I think maybe 2 or 3 novels in, I hit upon the fact that for me to finish something and for it to be good,
Mm-hmm.
I need to outline. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's that whole argument between are you a pantser or are you an outliner?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I started out as a pantser and was terrible at it.
Okay. And tell people
And
what a pantser is.
a pantser is someone who just starts writing and finishes a novel. Maybe they have some ideas about where they're going, but they don't outline anything. They just sort of
Mm-hmm.
wing it. And what I found is when I, just kind of go with it, I always need to do a lot of editing on the back end. And I mean, obviously, when you finish a book, you're going to be doing a lot of editing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can mitigate the need for as much editing, I'm all for that. And that
Yeah.
is why I am a super outliner now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will spend months outlining something before I start writing, which I know a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people think is bonkers, but it's how my brain works. It's how I sort of keep myself organized. And also, it helps me not get writer's block
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because you always know where you're going.
Yeah, yeah, very true, very true. So, and I also love this idea of palette cleansing because, and it sounds like with you, because you write in so many different ways, you're not feeling boxed into one particular genre.
For sure, for sure. Now, most of my work is horror.
Hmm.
Even my creative nonfiction, in some instances, is either horror or horror adjacent.
Okay.
Like I had an essay on the Horror Writers Association website last month about a ghost experience I had at Eastern State Penitentiary. This is
Uh-oh.
years ago.
Uh-huh.
But horror, but
Come on.
still an essay.
Yes.
But there's just I don't feel as though I need to only write horror.
Okay.
And if I wanted to write a romance novel, I could, and I don't feel as though This really gets into sort of the horror business and writing
Okay, go
business.
for it. Yeah.
But a lot of people, when they're writing horror, feel the need to have, or actually, it doesn't even matter if you're writing horror. People who write in different genres often will have different pen names that they
Yeah.
use for like each genre.
Yeah.
I don't really feel the need to do that.
Yeah.
Mostly because I kind of like being known as someone who can write around.
Yes.
And I don't think that I'm writing anything hideous enough that if I were writing for like little kids, okay, maybe I'd need a pen name so a 3-year-old wouldn't be tempted to read something I'd written.
Yes. Yes. I hear you.
But there's something to be said for having your name on everything you do.
Yeah.
And I just can't, I couldn't find a reason not to.
I hear you. I hear you. You know, it's interesting that, well, let me ask you this first before I go into that. Have you ever been or considered being a ghostwriter for someone?
So I kind of am a little bit of a ghostwriter because I
Okay.
write speeches for other people.
True. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while I haven't written fiction for anyone, I wouldn't say that I'd rule it out.
Okay.
My first agent and I talked a lot about whether or not I would want to do intellectual property work. And I said, sure, you know, it might be interesting. And whether my name is on it or not, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
I have always loved, I don't know if you've ever read it, but the Trixie Belden series.
No, I'm not familiar.
So Trixie Belden is sort of like Nancy Drew.
Okay.
The books for Trixie Belden were mostly popular in like the late 70s, early 80s. And they definitely had a ghostwriter for those. Like someone wrote maybe the first couple, let's say.
Okay.
And then they brought in a name or they brought in someone to write under that name.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I've always loved those. And I've always wanted to like, I've wanted someone to re-up the Trixie Belden series and let me write them. Like that is a dream. And I would totally do it for that.
Okay. Okay. I'll have to look up Trixie Belden. My mother used to always have me with the Nancy Drew, and I'm like, enough of Nancy Drew. Of course, I like, who was it? The Cassidy. Was it the Cassidy brothers or
David
Cassidy?
Yeah.
Yes, and their stuff. So
Hardy Boys, man.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. That's it.
Absolutely. And because I work in the nursing field, also the Cherry Ames books, which were popular in like the 50s, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. So now let's talk about your books. I have so many questions for you. But first, let's hold up your book, your latest one, and give your covers are so striking. Tell people the name of it, and let's talk about it a little bit.
So, A Misfortune of Lake Monsters is a young adult horror novel about a young woman who is more or less trapped in her Northeast Pennsylvania rural hometown, my hometown, and she can't leave because her family has tapped her to take over the family business of secretly impersonating the town's lake monster, which brings in tourists. And then she finds a real lake monster and screaming ensues. Now, it is considered cozy horror, which I know a lot of people think is a strange term.
It sure is. I can't wait to hear this. Cozy horror. Okay.
So think cozy mystery, right? They're usually set in a small town. They're not super scary. They might be a little tense, but nothing that's going to keep you up at night, like, you know, wanting to put your book in the freezer because it's too scary.
Gotcha.
You know. And cozy horror is kind of the same thing. It's set in a small town usually. It's maybe scary, but not so scary. It's usually not super gory. What I normally tell people is it's a little bit as though someone is giving you a hug when you're scared.
Okay.
Usually a little bit funny.
Okay.
Yeah. And someone who recently read the book said to me, and this is
Yeah.
perfect description of this book. It's as though Hallmark made a horror film.
Oh, I can read your book.
You
Okay.
completely read this book.
Okay.
It's also considered horror romance
Yes. Okay.
because there is a little bit of a romance in there.
Gotcha.
And the tagline that I wanted to use that my publisher was not excited about was come for the screaming and dismemberment, stay for the sweet love story.
And why were they not into that? I mean,
You know, sad, sad, sad state of affairs.
it's hilarious. Oh my goodness. One, I have to say I am excited because that I could read. Like that description. I am like, okay, I won't my heart won't be jumping out. I won't be having nightmares because I'm so visual that it will replay in my head. As I read, it's like there's a movie playing. And I even have to be careful, honestly, with what I watch on television. Like I can't it got to a point with even Chicago PD, I could not
Oh,
watch it right before I went to bed. And I very much enjoyed the show, but at night it would just be, and so I have to safeguard this this mental space of mine.
that's
Um,
fair.
yeah, yeah, but I like the fact that that description is there. I'm also loving the fact, like I said in the beginning of the show, when you talked about, what is that horror movie that you haven't considered horror, but yeah, it puts you into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. It got
Yep.
you palpitating like that. I mean, Beauty and the Beast, honestly,
Oh, yeah,
you know, if it wasn't for the
sure.
dancing teapot to try to bring me down a little bit, it was. So now, so you mentioned publisher. What was your publishing process like? Did you choose to go independent? Did you choose to go traditional? How has that worked for you?
So this is a little bit of a long story, but
Go for it.
so I've been agented twice, and
Okay.
my first agent and I were together for maybe about 11 years,
Mm.
and she took probably three of my novels out on submission. And,
Mhm.
we had a couple of close calls, but nothing sold. And at the end of our time together, she decided to pull back the number of authors she was representing.
Okay.
And I was not one of
You
them.
were one of them. Mhm.
Yeah, so that was fine. I mean, we parted on the best of terms, and she's a
Amazing.
wonderful person.
Yes.
It took me not very long to find a new agent, and I wrote A Misfortune of Lake Monsters while I was with my first agent, but it never went out on submission.
Okay.
So when I was searching for my next agent, I was querying on A Misfortune of Lake Monsters.
Mhm.
And I'd say it only took maybe 2 months tops to find a
Mhm.
second agent.
Oh wow.
And it helped that I had had that experience with an agent and that I had a book ready to go that was already like pretty strong. It was well edited. It was almost entirely ready to go as is,
Mhm.
which was great.
Mhm. Yeah.
My second agent took it out on submission, and it was out on submission for about 2 years, I guess, and didn't go anywhere. And at the end of the 2 years, I was a little bit burnt out. I mean, this
Mhm.
is going on what, like 15 years or so, or
Mhm.
close to 15
Mhm.
years of being out on submission. And I mean, yes, I had published short stories during that time, which is also a lot of help.
Okay.
Uh, but I was a little bit tired, and I didn't want the pressure of knowing that someone was waiting for a new book from me.
Okay.
So my agent and I parted ways, and
Mhm.
I was just gonna take a break.
Mhm.
And then a friend of mine emailed me and was like, "Hey, my publisher is accepting submissions from unagented authors, and I think that they're right for you. Maybe give it a
Mm.
shot."
Mhm.
I'm like, "All right." And this was Camcat Books, and they're a small publisher. And within, I'd say, a month, I had gotten the book acquired by myself without the agent.
Wow. Go
Yeah.
you.
Now, that's not to say I didn't hire an agent to look over my contract.
Yes.
Because, I am not about to go that alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. And now, of course, there are some things happening with this press. And
Mm-hmm.
sadly, the owner of the press passed away earlier this year, and
Oh,
the
wow.
press is in the middle of being, I think, subsumed is maybe the right word.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I don't quite know what's going on yet, so I'm just
Okay.
kind of going with it.
Yeah.
But this year, um, since Misfortune of Lake Monsters came out, which was July 2nd,
Mm-hmm.
I have done 18 events, and I have my 19th event next week. So I am ready for a break.
I bet you are. Let me tell you something. A friend of mine who is a fantastic jazz pianist and vocalist, he said this conversation is resonating with him. So, and just when you said as far as needing a rest, I know he needs a rest. So I know when you said that, it really, really hit home.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
this is
Wow,
the best time
19.
to take a break.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to catch up on my reading,
Uh-huh.
because one of the things no one really talks about is when you have a book published, you're going and going and going, and sometimes you're working on your second book, sometimes you're doing all these events, and you
Yeah.
don't really have time to sit and enjoy the books that you're buying when you go to
Yeah.
all these
Yes.
bookstores and book
Yes.
fairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. So where's your
So
next where is your 19th event? Where is that going to be and what will you be doing?
I will be in Iceland.
Oh,
Uh, yeah.
so
Uh,
exciting.
so one of the things that I had on my goal list as an author for this year was that I really wanted to do an event outside the United States. And I
Yeah.
didn't really do a lot to make it happen. But in this case, I got invited to be on a panel discussion at Iceland Noir.
Hmm.
And Iceland Noir is a small book festival that happens every year at the end of November in
Hmm.
Reykjavik. And it's
Hmm.
mostly thrillers and horror.
Hmm.
And I'm very excited that I get to be on a panel with a woman who also is a 2024 debut author in horror this year. Her
Okay.
name is Hilder, and of course, her last name, I cannot pronounce it, but
Okay.
her book is The Night Guest, which I read a couple of weeks ago, and it's fabulous.
Okay.
Hilder is Icelandic. She lives in
Hmm.
Reykjavik,
Hmm.
and her book is set in Reykjavik, and it's
Oh,
delightful.
wow.
You
Oh,
would not want to read that.
I don't
I
want to
can
read
tell
that.
you
Thank
already.
you. I
Yeah,
appreciate you.
that is not for you. It's creepy.
Okay, no, I'm good with what is it? The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Like I'm good with that.
One of my all-time favorites.
Like, oh, that is so, so exciting. Now, the irony here, my older brother, Iceland is one of his favorite places to visit. He goes several times. He loves to go.
It's
And one of
beautiful.
my favorite vocalists, Sissel, is from
Yeah.
Iceland. Beautiful, just her voice is beyond this world. So when I saw that you were going to Iceland, I was just like, of all places, are you kidding me? This is fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's
That's
nice to end sort of my book year with that.
yeah, you better believe it. You better believe it. Now, as far as all of these events, were these things that you booked yourself, that you searched for? Did they come to you? How did this happen?
A little of both.
Hmm.
So when I first started thinking about what I wanted my book year to look like,
Yeah.
I had in mind 3 events.
Okay.
And I organized those myself very early on. And one of them was so a novel idea in South Philly partnered with me for my pre-orders.
Hmm.
And when we were talking about sort of the events situation, I asked them if they would let me organize a panel discussion for them. And the owners were like, yes, do it. I'm like, great. So I did an event there. It was 2024 debut authors in young adult and middle grade horror.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Sammy Ellis, who lives in Philadelphia, who wrote a book called Dead Girls Walking.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, she was part of the panel, and I'm drawing a blank now. A really wonderful author from New York who writes middle grade, and I cannot believe I have issues remembering names sometimes.
It'll pop up. It'll pop up at any point in time. Feel free to throw it on the
Yeah.
table.
So those were the two on my panel,
Uh-huh.
and as it turned out, we had to fight. I think there were two concerts happening and a sports event in South
Oh,
Philly that night, which was
oh,
hilarious. So that was one of the events.
yes.
The other event that I really wanted to do was at Kelly Writer's house on Penn campus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I graduated from Penn, so I was really excited about the idea of doing this event, and luckily
Yes.
they agreed to it. And that was also with 2024 debut authors. Ashton Lattimore, actually, they were all local authors, which
Oh,
is
fantastic.
was really happy. Ashton Lattimore writes contemporary historical fiction.
Okay.
Laura Piper Lee writes romance, and
Mm-hmm.
Karen Tang wrote a book called It's Not Hysteria, which is about reproductive health.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And all fabulous women, fabulous writers, super excited to do an event with them. And the
Mm-hmm.
event was really well attended. I was very excited about it.
Nice.
I forget what the third one was. It was another panel, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from those three, I really didn't think anything else was going to happen.
Okay.
And then I'd get an email from a bookstore. Hey, do you want to do an event with us? I'm like, well, yeah, of course. And then I get another email. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, of course.
Uh-huh.
And, then another event would pop up and I'd be like, hey, can I be part of that? Like, that
Mhm.
was Halloween Scares at the Barnes and Noble in Wilkes-Barre.
Okay.
It was about a dozen horror authors, and, we all were selling books that day and doing readings. There was this really fun children's program where
Mm-hmm.
one of our authors taught kids how to create ghost stories.
Oh, cute.
It was really great.
Uh-huh.
And so by the end of any event that came my way, I said yes.
Yes.
Because of course you say
Yeah,
yes.
that's right.
Yeah. And so that's how I ended up with 19 events for this year.
Wow.
So there were a few things where I was just in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
There was a panel discussion at the Baltimore Book Festival, and
Mm-hmm.
that was because I was a member of SIFWA, which is the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, and they were
Okay.
looking for panelists for this
Mm-hmm.
event on their
Mm-hmm.
stage. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, yes, I'll do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I think it's so important. So for people who are just joining us, this is horror author Nicole Wolverton, and not just that she is an horror author, but I consider her a horror specialist because she actually has her master's from University of Pennsylvania in horror and storytelling. And as we talked about at the top of the show, that is a rare find in a university, and yet she found it. So, and so she has, this is her craft. This is something that has been near and dear to her. And when you go back and watch the replay, as I mentioned, we jumped right in. So if you missed the first 20 minutes, you missed a lot. All right. So go back and check out the replay. Horror is it's such an interesting genre, as we've learned so far today, because like you said, most of the time we're thinking more kind of like Michael Myers from a movie standpoint, right? From a writing standpoint, we might think of like It or something like that, as opposed to the different categories, as you talked about, like horror man's. You talked about there's more of like a soft horror versus more of the gory and things like that. And so understanding, would they be considered, I guess, subgenres within the genre of horror?
For sure, for sure. One of the books that I recommend to a lot of people, if they're sort of dipping a toe into the horror waters, is right, is a book called Monstrilio.
Okay.
And I'm going to get the author's name wrong. It's Geraldo Cordoba or something like that. There are three names. He
Mm-hmm.
is a writer from Mexico City who now lives in New York.
Okay.
And it is a gorgeous, gorgeous book. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, gorgeous book. And
Mm-hmm.
it's about grief and
Mm.
family and love. And
Okay.
it's so amazing. I recommend it to everybody because you can't help but fall in love with it, even if
Really?
you're not a horror reader.
Okay. All right. All right, Nicole. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get that, and I'm
And
getting
please let me
yours.
know what you
I will. I'm gonna do both. Hold up your book again so people can see it. The cover, like I said, is just so beautiful. It
they
is
did a
so
fabulous
beautiful.
job on this.
How did you choose? How did the design for the cover come?
This is a longer story. So when I signed with Camcat Books, they give you this little questionnaire to fill out, and like if you have any ideas for what the cover should look like. And the only thing I really said to them is I would really love some sort of a water scene.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is they do a couple of treatments for the cover and they send these to you, the author, and you kind of
Mm-hmm.
give a look and give your feedback. And the one we ended up going with was not this one. It was so it was a lake scene, and there was a long wooden dock, and there was a girl, a blonde girl, who's the with long hair, who is the
Mm-hmm.
protagonist here, and she was sitting at the end of the dock, looking out over the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the one that we picked, and we all loved it. And then someone from my publisher who had a book published, someone not accused her, that's kind of the wrong word, but told her that she had AI on the cover,
Oh,
artificial intelligence,
yeah, yeah.
and it was just coming into sort of discussion, like broader discussion, that
Mm-hmm.
AI was being used for covers and writing, and it was bad, and no one really wanted to be caught up in that, and
Yeah,
I did not want to be caught up in that.
yeah.
And so my publisher came back and they were like, hey, we asked the artist who designed your cover if he had used AI, and he said yes. What do you want to
Mm-hmm.
do? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't want AI on my cover.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to deal with sort of the blowback. I don't want to support AI
Yeah,
in art.
yeah.
And so that is how we came up with this cover. This was a cover that
Mm.
they had pitched me, and
Okay.
it was sort of my second favorite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But because we didn't want to have
Got
AI on
it.
the cover, we ended up with the
Yeah,
second choice, which I
yeah,
still loved.
yeah. It's funny, we were talking, I can't remember, like I said, I did a talk with five authors this week, you being number six, and we were talking about through the KDP portal, and it now asks you, is any of this AI generated? And it's very interesting that that is a question now that is
It
being
should be.
asked. And it should, I 100% agree. I know I was very AI adverse when it started making its way on the scene because being an artist, being a creative, being, IP, it was just like, no, like sit with it, get it, allow the stories to come to you, and so forth. And then having been an adjunct professor, I think plagiarism and all of those things. I want original content as
For
much as
sure.
possible. Yeah, yeah. So, what is on the horizon for you? Do we have some new books coming up, some writings? Where can people read more of your work? Where can people buy? Let's start with this. Where can people buy your books?
Anywhere.
Okay.
So except Target. I don't, well, actually, you can buy it online at Target, just not in the stores.
Okay.
um, if you were looking for a signed copy,
Yes.
I do believe the Barnes and Noble in Wilkes-Barre and in Levittown have them. I know that Mavy's Books in Ardmore has a few.
Okay.
A Novel Idea in South Philly might have one or two left.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Mm-hmm.
a few other places that might have them. I
Okay.
can't quite remember where, but
Okay.
Mavy's is where I had my most recent event where they took signed copies.
Gotcha.
That was actually the night before the election.
Okay.
We went head to head with the big rally on the
Oh
Parkway
boy.
in Philadelphia,
Oh my goodness.
and still had a crowd, which was delightful.
Okay, go you.
It's, me and Diana Rodriguez Wallach, who is another YA horror author in the area. We
Okay.
talked a lot about horror being inherently political, which was so much fun.
And right on time.
Right on time.
Right.
So here's what's coming up next. I have, let's see, I have a short story coming up in an anthology that's coming out in a few weeks. The anthology is called The Horror That Represents You, and it's coming out from Bridget's Gate Press. Anthology is about, well, all the writers who were chosen for the table of contents wrote about horror that's very personal to them.
Yes.
And so my story is called In the Darkness We Dig, and it involves teeth.
Okay.
I have a real problem with teeth
Okay.
as a horror trigger.
Yes.
I'm not going to go into it.
No problem.
Get the anthology and you read the story, you might understand.
Okay. All right.
It's also set in my house. It's not a true story at all. It's just set in my house.
Got it. Got it. All right.
Yeah. I have another story and an anthology coming out in January. This anthology is called Hauntings in Hoarfrost, and that's from Tick Books. And that story is called Everything in Its Place. It's a bit of a ghost story.
Okay.
I also have a piece of creative nonfiction coming out either sometime the end of this month or the beginning of next month.
Okay.
And that's issue 25 of the Vincent Brothers Review. And that's also set in my house.
I'm not coming to visit.
I know. It's called The Stories We Tell Ourselves, and it's about stigmatized houses and the stuff you find in your house that former owners left.
Oh, that sounds so good.
It's not horror. It's just kind of horror.
Gotcha. Okay. Would I be able to handle it?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing bloody about it.
Okay. Then
Yeah.
I should be okay.
Yeah.
Now tell us this. What is it like for you? And then you can finish telling us also what else you're in the process of releasing. But what is it like for you to be an author of your own books versus in an anthology?
So I will say this. When you have something in an anthology, it requires you to be fewer places. You might still have to do a little bit of publicity work for it.
Okay.
And it's nice to be in community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put together an anthology several years ago for a publisher. The anthology is called Bodies Full of Burning, and it is a short fiction anthology that centers horror through the lens of menopause. And
I know, I already hear my people saying, tell me more. Tell me more.
Yeah. So this is sort of a weird coincidence kind of story. Before Twitter turned evil,
yes,
I was on Twitter one day and I was
you have people running to follow you now. That was all you needed to say. They're like, that's my girl right there. Go ahead.
So I had posted something random like, gee, I'd really love to put together an anthology about menopause. And I mean, it was just wishful thinking, throwing it out into the universe, right?
Yeah.
And like a couple days later, I get this DM from a publisher, like a small press, being like, I'll let you do that. I'm like, really? So I was able to be the sort of editor curator of this anthology, and the stories range from like barely horror to pretty horrific. And it's basically people with uteruses or losing their uteruses or without a uterus who once had them, either being very, very angry and vengeful or being empowered. by
Yeah.
going into menopause, which I think when you're facing down sort of that period in your life,
Yeah.
you kind of need a variety of ways to feel about it.
Yeah.
And
So true.
so Bodies Full of Burning was sort of a passion project for me, and it
Mm-hmm.
turned out beautifully. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I bring this up is because when I'm in an anthology, one of the things that I learned as an editor myself is that you often have to turn down stories that you absolutely love, either because you've just accepted something very similar or because the story doesn't necessarily fit into the narrative of what you're trying to build.
Yeah.
And so being an anthology as a writer, I have like this weird appreciation for the other side of it. Like, oh, I'm going to read this in exactly this order that the editor has chosen for the table of contents because this is
Mm-hmm.
the story they want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of it, it feels very different than before when I had been accepted to anthologies, when I didn't quite understand the process as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate that for so many reasons. A lot of times people will not submit things for fear of rejection as
Yeah.
if it is personal and the person is rejecting you, as opposed to not understanding that what you have submitted is just not what they're looking for at the moment.
Yeah. That's a that's a good lesson. It
Yes.
really is. I mean, really, it's good for your mental health as a
Yes.
writer to
And
understand
your
that.
heart. Yes, yes.
But also, a lot of writers I know, if they get a rejection, they'll completely rewrite a piece without
Mhm,
having any feedback on it. And
mhm.
it's not that the piece is bad. Like you said, it's just not quite right for this thing or
Yep,
this time.
yeah,
And I have a rule myself. If I get a rejection, I send it out 2 more places.
okay.
And that is how I keep myself moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great role. That's a great role. Well, we are getting ready to come to the top of the hour. I want you to share what else do you have coming out, and then
Oh,
I'll ask you about 2 more closing questions.
all right. So that is kind of it for me at this
Okay.
point. And I think I said that I have an essay coming out, I think next year in
Uh-huh.
this Deep Space Nine
Yes,
collection.
yes.
Uh, I don't have a clue what it's called. I
Okay.
don't have a clue when it's coming out,
Gotcha.
but it's been accepted and it'll eventually see the light of day, and that's fine. Now I am
Fantastic.
taking a writing break.
Okay.
I'm going to take at least 3 months and probably just read.
Mhm.
I do have a novel plot that has been rattling around in my head, and I might have to cheat a little on my reading to do that,
Okay.
to work on the outline. I've also been considering doing a little bit of screenwriting.
Mm,
As part of my master's program, I had taken a screenwriting class, and I have like 90% of a screenplay written
mm.
that I should finish because I hate not finishing things.
Mhm,
I don't
mhm.
know what I'm going to do with it, but
Okay.
yeah,
And that actually goes into one of my questions, which was, would you consider turning your book into a film?
absolutely.
Okay.
Um, so Lake Monsters is a particularly visual story
Mhm,
anyway,
mhm.
and it would
And you
lend
already have
itself
a
well.
character. You already have a dog that dresses up like the lake monster. So we've
I
already seen it.
know.
Myrtle is the best. Y'all have to see Myrtle in full regalia. Okay, go ahead.
I could put Myrtle in the film.
You could.
One of the characters in A Misfortune of Lake Monsters, one of the canine characters is my old dog, my late dog.
Whoa.
Um, but yeah, I would totally do that, and you never
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
never say never, right?
Fantastic. That's right. That's right. All right. Second to last question is, what do you read in your reading time?
So the shelves behind me, this entire shelf and this bottom shelf, I have 2 shelves of to be read list, and
Mhm.
behind my computer screen, there's another two piles of books that are needing to be read.
Yes.
So I can tell you a little bit what's on my shelf.
Please.
So I have Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land. I have A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which is a short story collection by George Saunders. I have Burn Down, Rise Up, which is a book by Vincent Tirado, who's another young adult horror writer who's local.
Okay.
Let's see, what else do I have? I have a bunch of books on Bloody Mary because originally when I started my master's program, I was going to write a thesis on Bloody Mary and the sort of what the symbol of the mirror and the windows mean within the legend.
Okay.
So I have those to read. I have Tanana Reeve Dew's book, The Reformatory. I have Chuck Wendig's book that's set in the orchard. Lots of horror.
Nice. Look at you.
I'm excited. I'm like totally excited to get into my reading. I have a little bit of nonfiction in there as well. Obviously, Barack Obama's book.
Yeah.
Anything I can read that's sort of nonfiction-y that might contribute to something I read down the line. I'm all excited about it.
Okay. Fantastic. How can people follow you and stay abreast of what you're doing?
Okay, so clearly I'm not on Twitter.
Don't go there, y'all. You're not going to find her.
I am at Nicole M. Wolverton on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads. My website is www.nicolewolverton.com. And if you go to my website, there's a pop-up where you can sign up for my newsletter. I send that like once a month. And it's usually just like me rambling about where I've been, what I'm going to be doing. Sometimes I throw in an excerpt of something I'm writing. I always have recommendations.
Okay.
Whether it's short stories, books, or movies. And I always have a little section on what my current obsession is.
Okay.
It's usually something kind of weird. Like the one that I'm working on for December 1st, my obsession is about two sisters. Their last name is Overstegen, I believe. And a friend of theirs, they were Amsterdam girls. They lived in Amsterdam during World War II. And basically, they liquidated Nazis.
Oh, interesting.
The book that I just bought to read more about them is called Seducing and Killing Nazis.
Oh, well, that's a title. Okay.
Yeah, it's written by a woman who lives in Amsterdam and knew these two women personally before they passed away. And they passed away, I want to say, in like the early 90s or like the late 80s.
Okay.
So I'm really interested in this all of a sudden for reasons.
Right. Yes.
And so we'll see how that turns out. Other things that I've been interested in not lately, but for a while now, I'm really, really interested in the bodies of incorruptible saints. I am not Catholic at all, but the idea of incorruptible saints is really fascinating.
All right. Well, we might end up with a book at some point about this. Oh, we might. Well, Nicole, to say that our talk has been fascinating is an understatement. I have enjoyed this time. You are welcome. This has been fantastic. You all, I have told you already, if you missed the first 20 minutes, you better go back and catch the replay. If you have not subscribed to YouTube channel Ask Dr. Walls 525, I encourage you to do so. I have a fascinating lineup of authors this past week, as well as continuing to come up into the new year as well. Be sure to follow, click subscribe, hit those notification bells. This Sunday, I have a special episode at 6 p.m. I rarely do weekend episodes, but I had to capture this person while they are currently stateside. I'll be talking with author, martial artist, world changer Vincent Lin. Also, he's an actor as well. And he happened to be stateside, and we spoke yesterday, and he was like, just let me know when I can get on. And I was like, Let's go. Sunday at 6 p.m. He'll be coming on to talk about the work that he does, the books that he's written, and just everything. An incredible story. I also want to take a moment and encourage people to, in addition to Nicole's books, I want you to remember also check out Digital Money Demystified by Professor Tanya Evans. Bitcoin is going through the roof right now. So, for people who want to find out more about what that is and what that's all about, this is a nice beginner's book by a trusted source. Professor Tanya Evans, has written a lot of programs for law schools about this. So this is not just someone who's pretending to know stuff. This is someone who's actually taken the time to do the research and put it together for you. I had a chance to interview her last year when right before her book came out. So you can also see that on the playlist. Of course, I have all my Adventures of Froggy Tea and Bunny books, so you can check those out too. But today we want to definitely take this moment again and shout out Nicole Wolverton, who I just think has one of the flyest names out there.
I should have been a romance author.
Okay. I'm saying it's right there. So I encourage you, definitely. She's giving you a tremendous amount of books, just even to touch, start to walk through this horror space. And I appreciate that as a horror. I would say I was horror adverse, but now I will say I am slightly horror curious.
Then my work here is done.
The work is done. I'm going to dip my toes and one day work up too. So, but I I appreciate, and I did. I loved Alfred Hitchcock growing up. My mother and I used to watch them all together. And then who was the Vincent?
Oh, Vincent Price.
Yeah, yeah. So it's in me. It's in me. So we'll see. We'll see how far I get. We'll see.
Oh yeah,
All right.
we're
So
there.
I she's bringing it out, y'all. She's bringing it out. Safe travels to you. Have
Thank
a
you.
wonderful time. I look forward to touching base with you again. All right.
Thank you
All
so much
right.
again for having me on, and thanks for everybody for joining us.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. All right, y'all. I'll see you soon. As always, be well. God bless and continue to live your greatest life. Have a great Friday and a wonderful weekend. Talk with you soon.